I was looking at your map, and I live north of the Waimakariri River, so I'm in North Canterbury and the bustling metropolis of Waipara, and it occurred to me we could probably do with some green dots up there, so happy to help you with the extension of that program. The only challenge I will have is that my tree planting endeavours are somewhat embarrassing to date. So when I began my role as Threatened Species Ambassador about 5 years ago, a lot of what I was doing was sort of opening envelopes and kissing babies, and there was a lot of quite symbolic aspects to the role, which I quickly sort of shifted towards a more science communication approach, and one of the things that I was often asked to do was to go and plant a tree. And often I was asked to do this at the last minute for the minister, who may have been asked to plant a tree and couldn't make it at the time. I'm banking on the fact that this is Chatham House rules, by the way. I had a very embarrassing experience, which I have to share because it's hilarious. Well, I hope you think it's hilarious. So I travelled to Motatapu Island in the Hauraki Gulf with Bill Oddie, who was my childhood hero because he was in the goodies. Sorry to the millennials. But also, he has become a kind of world-class birder. And so I took him over to, he was here for a writers' festival, I took him to Motatapu Island, we showed him some birds, we did some media, and the lovely people at the Motatapu Restoration Trust radioed up the dock team and said, would it be okay if Nicola and Bill came and planted a tree? And we said yes, we would love that. And so as we drove up there, the operations manager for the department up there said to me and Bill and several others in the car, including someone from the Royal Society, the chief executive of Zealandia and other notable people, when we get up there, Nicola and Bill, there will be obviously be shovels for you, and so you'll be able to participate in planting your tree. And I sometimes, you may have noticed it already, speak before I think. And so I said, oh, will we be digging our own holes? Because usually when I do this, someone does that for me. So while I am very excited to be part of extending the dots of Ara Kakariki, I will need lessons in how to actually plant a tree, because I'm not convinced that I have the confidence to do it properly yet. You only one, Craig. So I also promised, obviously, that I would come along and speak with you all tonight. I'd rather speak with you, so I much prefer a kind of engaging session where a little less of a heckling, but, you know, happy to take questions. And it occurred to me that I sort of have come full circle. So about 10 years ago, I came home to Waiponamu, which is my place. And I worked first for Forest and Bird, and then for what was TV3 and is now known as Osprey. And then I took a job with Living Water, running the South Island projects. And one of our very, very, very first projects was this one, which is the Carricks project on Silverstream. And it's really neat to be back here today. And still be talking about these places, and I have a different lens, if you like, on these places, because I'm responsible for a whole bunch of rangers who are engaging with you all the time on this work, and then I have some governance roles with Craig and others on how we protect this place. And it just reminds me that in the end there's two things really I want to talk about. So first of all, you're not my favourite crowd, because I feel like I'm preaching to the converted, right? You are all people passionately involved in this work. You don't need me to tell you why this work is important or why it's really crucial that we save the things and look after the nature. But instead I've decided to reflect a little bit on the power of us working together and the fact that there is room for all of us. So I know that out there right now there's a lot of resource, and there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of projects, and we're all kind of jostling for, I'm Ara Kakariki, and I'm Living Water, and I'm the local community group, but actually there's real value in bringing us all together and working in a way that is collaborative, not competitive. So that would be my first thing. The other note that I quickly wrote to myself was that while I love the Kakariki logo, and you're right, the curator for native birds at the Canterbury Museum collected them. He actually collected them by shooting them off the museum roof at the time because there were so many. There are now somewhere between 100 and 150 in the wild, and were it not for the likes of Isaac's Conservation Wildlife Trust and others, they would certainly be extinct. I think that if you were going to change your logo, having just had the privilege of wandering the insect collection of Lincoln University, which I am told is, the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere, says Mike. At least 250,000 insects, many of which are endemic to New Zealand and to Canterbury alone. I think your next logo should absolutely be a novel weevil, the last of which was seen, well, not the last of which, but were recorded on what is now Hagley Park. So I expect a much cooler future logo with novel weevils on it. And so I guess I kind of, this talk might be a little bit of a meandering yarn, and it is really a collection of my reflections over the past year, what it's meant to travel to the other side of the world to represent New Zealand on our biodiversity and ecosystem services for what became a kind of world-renowned report, sometimes known as the Million Species Report, to suddenly be in a country with the borders closed and thinking about what's important to us and how we work together to protect those things from now on. I don't know if many of you have seen this graph before. It's actually over 10 years old. And at the time, Rockstrom and Will Stephen created this kind of planetary boundaries graphic. And you can see, and this pretty much represents what we have in New Zealand, right? So we know that the issue of phosphorus and nitrogen is all very pertinent to us, particularly in this region, this catchment is crucial. But if you look carefully, you will also see that the biodiversity kind of section was starting to blow out quite quickly. And I wonder if sometimes we forget about the biodiversity crisis while we're busy worrying about the other crises. And so when I was at this, and having had at least a glass of wine, I will do my best, the Intergovernmental Science and Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, yes, the chair at the time said, we need governments to work with the private sector, with NGOs and academia, and furthermore, we need cross-sectoral action and we need everyone involved. And I kind of thought about that, and I thought about his plea, and there were plenty of pleas during what was the longest week of my life and some of the longest hours I've ever done. And it occurred to me that here tonight, it's sort of an anomaly, because I feel like this room, this mahi, this kaupapa has been doing that for a really long time, and you've actually got the evidence to prove it. But if I take you back to what New Zealand used to be, so this is Richard Henry, he's kind of my hero, and he, if you haven't read the book about Richard Henry and Resolution Island, I highly recommend. And his diaries describe this: on the west from the mouth of the Waio, for 25 miles of beach, there are neither signs nor sounds of kakapo, weka, nor kiwi, where there used to be numerous, but there are plenty of ferret tracks on the beach. The creeks in the bush, grey teal and blue duck were plentiful, but now they are all gone. And the black teal are rapidly going also, and in all probability will soon be simply a memory of the past. The reason that that speaks to me so much, apart from being south of it, is the tragedy of shifting baselines. So if you grow up in Canterbury today, I have a 7-year-old son, your world is a world of monoculture, no Indigenous biodiversity anywhere where you can readily find it, no tui, no kaka, tui was the exception in Hawaii, of course, and that becomes your norm. And so the worry about that is, for my son's children, what is their norm? And how do we turn the shifting baseline from a negative to a positive, which is what I think Te Ara Kakariki and all of you who contribute to the broader picture of that are teaching our children today. And as a slight diversion, and I will do this from time, you kind of need the shepherd's crook. Just a, yeah. So a while ago I went to Zealandia to film a story about 4 years ago, and in fact it was outside of Zealandia, it was in the Pole Hill Reserve. Now the Pole Hill Reserve is sort of on the edge of the Zealandia fence. I'm sure you know about Zealandia if you haven't had the privilege of being there, so it's a predator-proof sanctuary. And it was the worst southerly. I lived in Wellington for 5 years. It was the worst southerly I had ever experienced in my time in Wellington. So bad that we killed a $250,000 TV3 camera. Whoops, sorry. And while we were there, we were interviewing the local community about the work they were doing on the traps and the tracks just outside the Zealandia sanctuary. And the talent for my story were a 7 and an 8-year-old girl. And they were taking me around the traps. They'd taken the day off school. They were not bothered by the heinous weather. And they were busy showing me dead rats and traps and various other things. And while we were there, and so some of you, particularly the dog staff, will know that despite all the talk, I don't really like to go out in the nature, especially if I have to walk a long way and carry heavy things. If I have to share accommodation, I am more of a glamper than a camper when it comes to dog kind of work. And so these two girls were not there, they were proper. And what I realised, so we walked from the council playground, which is just on a kind of, nicely mown grass, about 300 metres down the track, along the side of the Zealandia Sanctuary. And in that 300 metre walk, in that pouring heinous, terrible southerly, we saw at least 24 keriru. We saw a flock of kaka. We saw a hihi and a saddleback, both of which of course had been extinct on the mainland for 100 years until they'd been reintroduced to Zealandia. And then we saw nothing because everything went quiet, and a falcon went roaring down the track over our heads, and everything kind of went shh. And what I realised was for those two girls, their baseline now was entirely different. So their children will expect to see hihi, will expect to see tieki, will expect to hear the silence as a falcon whishes through the track. And that gives me hope, and the work of Te Ara Kakariki, the work of all of you combined to amplify and sow the seeds across the plains is what gives me hope as well.